Earlier, we're talking about, we played that clip of Sarah Huckabee Sanders really avoiding the question of how can the administration justify this? And frankly, look, this has been the same question that's existed for, I don't know, the month and a half that they have, when they announced this policy, which is and they more or less said it, like, this is a deterrent. This is, like publicly, whipping someone or something to that effect. The idea is that we don't want, and it's not just a deterrent for don't cross the border without papers. It's a deterrent. Don't come to us asking for asylum. We've already announced that even if you live in a country where they don't recognize that domestic abuse of women is a bad thing, even if you come from a country where our propagation of murderous gangs endangers your children, don't come to us and ask for asylum. We're going to make it a living nightmare for you. So that is the game plan. Here is a picture of apparently one of the murals that is in one of these detention centers where they store kids. It's a huge mural of the White House with a picture of Donald Trump, with the saying, sometimes by losing a battle, you find a new way to win the war.
It's nice that they have it in Spanish, too.
Yeah. I don't know what that is supposed to say to these kids, but it's creepy. Here is Chris Hayes interviewing a guy, good for him, who quit from one of these detention centers because of the influx of children who apparently in the past, when you've had unaccompanied minors, they knew what was going to happen. They would show up at the border. They would go through a 2 or 3 month processing. Then they would be able to make it, hopefully, to family members. In this instance, we have parents coming with children, and the children get ripped away from the parents, and the kids freak out, as, of course. Here's Hayes interviewing this conscientious objector, I guess.
And then there are more stories coming out about what it's like inside those child detention facilities. Today, the LA Times published the account of one worker at a facility in Tucson who described a strained and understaffed environment for children. That whistleblower, Antar Davidson, joins me right now. Antar, you worked in a facility in Tucson. Can you tell me how many kids were in there and what their ages were?
Sure. First, thanks for having me on the show. I resigned as of Tuesday as a conscientious objector to what was happening there, so I no longer work there. Basically, there were about ranging between 280 to 300 kids, aged from about 4 to 17. However, there have been adults that posed as adolescents, and they were caught, and they were as old as 26.
4 to 17. I want to focus in on this transition period, the change after what's called the zero tolerance policy or family separation starts happening in the last few months. What change do you see in a facility that had been designed for unaccompanied minors that is now getting children who are being taken from their parents? What did you see change there?
Yep. Well, you see basically a facility set up for a more transient population that is extremely strained already, then have to deal with a much more traumatized population that has no clue what's going on. The laws are changing every day, and as such, seeing as their kids, some as young as 5, they're extremely traumatized by this and act up. And there were more kids coming, and they were more and more traumatized and harder to deal with, leading to a harder, more authoritarian approach by the staff in attempting to deal with them.
So you have this situation with the kids where they are traumatized, and of course they are. No way to prepare kids for that. Let's listen to the second one. I mean, understand that this policy is new. We did detain unaccompanied minors in the past because how could you not? How could you take a 15-year-old or 14-year-old who shows up at the border without a parent, 17-year-old even, and just let them wander around? You need to hook them up with families or their families or foster families. Here is that conscientious objector talking about essentially what this detention center is in terms of the training that people have there.
So high in those departments.
Final question for you. When you're talking about 4 or 5-year-olds, like who is care? That's a very young kid. That's not a kid that you got a 14-year-old, 13-year-old, 12-year-old. You can have lights out, go to the dorm, wake up in the morning, they come down for breakfast. 4-year-old, 5-year-old, you got to be managing that kid much more closely. Are there enough adults, and are they trained to be looking after a 4-year-old?
Not at all. We received 1 week of training. And now these kids are extremely traumatized, and they're put to bed at the end of the shift. Our shift would end at 9:30, and these are people, as much as the children are suffering, the workers are suffering. They're kept in temporary positions, and meanwhile, the CEO and his wife clear more than $1 million a year in mostly federal tax money, and they basically undercut the services. So it's a basic private prison model in the guise of this shelter. So the people at the end of the day, when they have to put these kids to sleep, have already worked an 8-hour shift, are oftentimes asked to stay overtime and exhausted. And on top of that, these kids are very traumatized. They're running up and down the halls, screaming, crying for their mom, throwing chairs, and everyone it's a tired, undertrained staff dealing with an increasingly traumatized and uncompliant population of minors.
I should know,
so it's a recipe for disaster.
We've invited the CEO of Southwest Key to appear on the show. We've got
so high in those.
There you go. It's amazing. It really is amazing. And on some level, what the most amazing part about it is, you know, and there's no doubt that if you dug deep enough, I mean, certainly in the context of private prisons, you could find these stories without a doubt. And we used to talk about them. The scams that were involved in the way that, you know, prisoners were treated. And I would imagine you could have found stories maybe not quite like this during the Obama era. Not quite like this. But ones that would have been, it would have offended our sensibilities. What's amazing about what we're watching now is that there very well may not be a reaction to this by a huge swath of our population. And that's really stunning. Here, put up that poster again. They're in this detention center, the poster, in the detention center that I guess Jacob Soperoff reported from on MSNBC the other night. There is this poster. Like we said, it's a picture of Donald Trump in front of an American flag with the White House there. Apparently, posters like this are not uncommon in facilities like this. Past presidents have had them. Barack Obama had one where it said, "Immigrants are the foundation of our country." Honestly.
That is quintessential.
Honestly.
Orwellian.
Allah is the way.
Well,
The Quran is his revelation.
I mean, it was a way of welcoming immigrants because some of these centers are not meant to house people like the the conscientious objector said, these are transient people. These are people who know that they're traveling through this and they're being processed, literally being processed and being set up with either their families or other families, distant cousins or foster homes. Trump put that poster back up. The quote that he has there is, sometimes by losing a battle, you find a new way to win the war. This is a quote from Donald Trump. And it turns out it's from The Art of the Deal. And it comes from chapter 10, the opening lines of chapter 10, which is about his fight, according to Parker Malloy, his fight to evict people from their homes and tear down their buildings.
So my message is a lot more synchronized than Obama's.
Well, his message is, I'm going to get you one way or another.
Yep.
And
That's right.
you folks, we're going to get you out of this country one way or another. So you may have been able to get in, but we're going to use you as leverage to make sure that nobody else does.
He's telling them not to give up. Like, sometimes you lose a battle, you're getting deported, but you'll find a way to win the horrible war that's ravaging your country.
Yeah, I think he's talking to himself.
I think it's a pep talk.
I'm doing self-affirmation.
Jamie's so
She's in the tank for Trump.
She's so in the tank for the Trump.
Yeah, she likes
so
Trump.
in the tanky for Trump.
Yeah, there's.
But it's also
Ooh, look at that.
so optimistic. But there it is. I mean, this is super creepy stuff. And I wonder, who chose that quote?
I did.
Or who made that mural? Like, I want to see the art. Conceivably, that's FOIA, Freedom of Information
Yeah.
It
Actable.
was Banksy.
So if anybody knows how to file those, that
We
might be
contracted
interesting.
Banksy.